and now we're on the Mamayev Kurgan. So an iconic place, really. I always liked visiting it when I went to, I'm going to say Stalingrad rather than Volgograd. I always liked visiting it, and at night, visiting it at night, which sounds a bit kind of corny, but it's an amazingly atmospheric place. And of course, now it's a huge memorial complex. So the title of my talk is The Battle for the Mamayev Kurgan, but I'm going to look at two battles, really. And one is a symbolic battle around the Mamayev Kurgan as a memorial icon, really, to Stalingrad, to the Great Patriotic War, and to Russian patriotism, and the contested meanings of that between certainly the communist view, which was that Stalingrad would always be held and that everyone was heroic, and a more cynical Western view that it was German mistakes, and also any heroism was at the point of a gun pointed at your back. So I'd like to explore that, but also explore the actual fighting on the Kurgan. And the title of my talk is 1942, but the 62nd Army, that was the army, it's known by veterans as the Army of the City Battle. It's the army that was never intended to defend Stalingrad. They were never intending to just have one shattered army trying to hold the city, but that's how it turned out. Are commanded from the 12th of September 1942 by Vasily Churkov, who set up his first command post on the Mamayev Kurgan, but that was just for a day. The bombing was so intense it was impossible to carry on there. So he moved to the Zaritsa Gorge. He had a lot of HQs, moving around quite a lot in that battle. But it's a very, very powerful place. And the last moment, really, well, there were two moments, occurs actually in January 1943, because it was a point of pride to the 62nd Army to actually recapture the summit of the Kurgan. And they did this. It was Batyuk's 284th Division. They did this on the 11th of January. They actually recaptured the summit. And there was no point in doing this from a strategic perspective, because the German army was encircled and Operation Ring had started. The German army was falling apart. But it was actually a point of pride to regain the top of the Kurgan before the Soviet armies that were conducting the Operation Ring came in. So the defenders, and I think it was the 26th Army, actually joined up on the slopes of the Kurgan on the 26th of January, which is marked, the point where they met is marked by a T-34 tank. But they wanted to win the Kurgan first. And so I'm going to explore these two themes, the actual fighting from 1942 to 1943, and also how the Mamayev Kurgan has become a symbol, and perhaps a contested symbol, of victory. And I'd like to start by saying that if we time traveled back to Stalingrad in the summer of 1942 and asked where the Mamayev Kurgan was, we would be looked at blankly, because it was never referred to as such in all official documents, all official Soviet documents right through the battle. It's just known as Hill 102, because it was 102 meters high. And in slang in Stalingrad, it was sometimes called the Mound, the Kurgan. But the first references to it being called the Mamayev Kurgan actually occurred during the battle, and really it was a nickname that grew into something much bigger that was created by the 62nd Army and their commander Vasily Churkov. So the Mamayev Kurgan is very ironic because now, of course, it's a symbol of Russian patriotism. We have the huge statue on the top, and the muzzle and calls, and the great sword. But actually, if you were a naughty school kid in 1930s Russia and your room was in a total mess, your mum might say, what a heap. It looks like Mamay's been on the rampage, because Mamay, a Mongol warrior of the 14th century, was one of the worst ravagers, destroyers of Russia. Is now commemorated as a kind of beacon of Russian patriotism. So I think that would certainly have surprised him. If I can take you on a walk, a kind of guided walk of the Mamayev Kurgan as it is now. And there is a tension, and there was a tension, and there certainly is now in Russia, between memorialization, which is very selective and often has a very strong propaganda point, and respecting the topography of the battle, of a battle. So, for example, if you tried to make sense of the Battle of Prokhorovka, the classic battle in 1943 during the Battle of Kursk, the place that you're directed to go, it's impossible to make sense of the battle at all. And the Mamayev Kurgan complex has actually damaged key topographical features of the battle. I'll get on to that in a moment, but we're going to start at the main road, so at the bottom of the hill, the Mamayev Kurgan. So we start with a sculpted relief that shows ordinary people carrying banners, and it's a relief of remembrance. It's signposting the fact that thousands of Soviet soldiers were killed in the actual fighting on the Kurgan. In fact, Nikolai Maznitsa, he was the company commander in Gorishna's 95th Division, said there were so many corpses, they were literally littering the ground all around them. He said it was awful, it stank, you just had to get used to it. But also after the battle, on the 8th of February, 6 days after the battle ended, dead from all over the battlefield were buried on the Kurgan, and there was a simple ceremony with a big wooden cross marking these mass burial pits on the Kurgan, and 34,000 bodies were buried on the 8th of February. And so it has this extraordinary sense around bereavement and loss. And then you go up steps, so you start rising above the what is essentially the river embankment, and there are 200 steps. The steps, it's 10 meters wide, and that is representing the 200 days of the battle. So everything is choreographed. And then, to my mind, I personally find the memorial very moving. There are an avenue of poplar trees, quite a long avenue, and then one gets to this extraordinary relief of a soldier. It's called Stand to the Death. And when I was walking on the hill with Anatoly Mereshko, who was on the army command at Stalingrad, he simply said, well, that's Churkov. And it is, and the sculptor. So Churkov, the commander, is representing this idea of standing to the death. He's holding a machine gun in one hand and a grenade in the other. It's very Stalingrad-like. So you're met by this formidable figure, and then you have what are known as the walls, the soldier walls. So you start going up steps again, and these were actually the sculptor Evgeny Yukovich actually went round ruined Stalingrad and spoke to a lot of veterans, and the intention was to capture moments from the battle, but of course they were moments edited, framed in a way that would reflect the glory of the Soviet Union, but nevertheless they're quite authentic. And as you climb up what I call the soldiers' walls, martial music is interspersed with battle sounds. You hear the sirens, you hear the machine guns. So you get all this din, this cacophony of sound. And then you come to a lake, a little, I mean, it's a long pool. And this is a place of reflection. And supposedly, I think it symbolizes the Volga as a kind of talisman, really, of the spirit of Mother Russia. So you move from noise to quiet. And then at the end, there is an entry point into the Hall of Memory, which is, I've never not found it moving, actually. You go up and there's the eternal flame and 7,000 names on the walls of Soviet soldiers who died. I mean, there are obviously many more than that, but it's symbolic. And you can walk around and up. And as you come out, you get to the original height of the Kurgan. You get to 102 meters because it's now been artificially elevated. So you come out, and this huge memorial complex was completed in 1967. The idea was mooted very strongly in the first reunion of veterans, which occurred on the 15th anniversary of the end of the battle. So that's on the 2nd of February, 1958. And when they all got together for the first time, there was this very strong feeling, particularly promoted by Vasily Churkov, that there should be a memorial complex and it should be on the Mamayev Kurgan. And the building work plan was commissioned, the building work started the following year and it finished in 1967. But quite uniquely at this level, so we're now at 102 meters and already there's an incredible view all over the city. There is the grave of Vasily Churkov. So he was not only a Soviet general, he commanded the 62nd Army, then the 8th Guards Army. He was responsible for the surrender of Berlin, became Minister of Defense under Kosygin, and someone like that would have always been buried on Red Square. So it was absolutely astonishing when Churkov decided, and his son Sasha showed me his will, where he actually wrote into his will. So he was dying of septicemia in 1981. She died in early 1982, and he said, I want to be buried on the Mamayev Kurgan, where I had my first command post, where you hear the roar of the Volga waves and feel the agony of Stalingrad's ruins, where most of my soldiers are buried. So he wanted, uniquely at that time, to be buried with his soldiers. And that started a trend. Now, then the motherland, astonishingly large statue, which was actually based on a very attractive waitress in the Volgograd restaurant that the sculpture was visiting. And she said, I got into a lot of trouble with my husband posing for that, but nevertheless, all for a good cause. But as you progress up to the motherland calls, there are a lot of other burials. So some of them were after Churkov was buried there, others decided they'd be buried too, but also some families decided to move the remains. So Vasily Zaitsev's remains, ironically, were buried in Kiev, but the family then decided after Churkov's decision that they'd be moved, reinterred on this additional mound that leads up to the motherland cool statue. So there are a lot of officially recognized dead in this section of the battlefield. And when I was with Mereshko and also with, I mean, I've been on the Mamayev Kurgan with quite a few veterans who fought on it, and they have a little ritual, which is, I think, one of the themes I really want to bring out is not just the tactical and strategic, but is what veterans would call the spiritual nature of the battle, which is a remarkable thing that communists and atheists would say, but they do. And so a kind of spiritual, I mean, psychological, spiritual, and sentimental, if you like, or superstitious is a better word. But one ritual they do is they always talk to Churkov. And I actually said, I mean, I don't want to barge in, but Mereshko said, no, he and two others were standing by the grave. We're quite happy for you to join us. And they stand in silence, and then they say, greetings, comrade commander, your soldiers of the 62nd Army are here with you. So the living speak to the dead, and that's I found that very powerful, actually. So they have that little ritual of a kind of communing, the dead and the living communing with each other. And so we have this huge, very powerful memorial complex. And one aspect of that, so if we went back to the summer of 1942, the Kurgan, if we call it that, Hill 102, had actually two summits. One was slightly lower than the other, but the weight of German bombardment actually obliterated it, so it literally got flattened. But the other one, the higher, at 102 meters, was marked by a series of water storage towers, which were a key part of the battle. I mean, if you were in, for example, the 39th Regiment of the 13th Guards, and you'd had a bloody well storm the Mamayev Kurgan in broad daylight on the morning of 16th of September, and boy, if you did that, you didn't forget it, having been with several people who did, including the guy who had to oversee the suicide attack. But as you charged up, so you had no air support, Germans totally controlling the skies, you promised tank support, you promised 50 tanks, 4 turned up and they all broke down, no supporting artillery fire. And of course the Germans would be holding the summit where the water towers were, and that's where the machine gun emplacements were. So I spoke to a company commander, and he said, of an entire company of 122 men, by the time they're approaching the summit, there are about 5 or 6 of them left. And you know, it's kind of unimaginable, really, what they had to do. And totally, of course, against the image of Stalingrad just being this attrition battle where the terrain, the bombed roofs were protecting the defenders. Well, that was not true on the Mamayev Kurgan. But these water towers were iconic, and they were fought over, and the 62nd Army regained them. They were thrown off again. They got them back again by another suicidal frontal assault. Then, because the Germans wanted the summit, because from a German point of view, if you were on the summit, you could call in accurate artillery fire all over the city. So from point of view of getting artillery spotters up there, they wanted it. So for a while, it was a kind of no man's land. But by the late September, the Germans had got it, heavily fortified it, and they stayed on the top of the Mamayev Kurgan until the 11th of January 1943, when they were pushed off. But in a very superstitious way. So there was a conversation between, so first of all, it was Redimtsev's 13th Guards. These are divisions that are being filtered into Stalingrad. And in terms of context, if we look at the initial attack on the 13th, 14th of September, what's very unusual is both sides are unable to maximize their strength. Paulus, who was crippled by his own method, thinking that crippled is obviously my judgment, committed 2 divisions to the attack on the 14th of September that did take the Mamayev Kurgan and got to the central ferry crossing and very, very nearly won the battle. But the reason he didn't commit at least 1 more division and possibly 2 was that he wanted his flanks, and his flanks were not on the Volga but on the Don. So while Churkov, at the beginning of the battle, Churkov was appointed commander on the 12th of September, the same day that Hitler told Paulus to get a move on and take the city. While Churkov was shuffling around on the Mamayev Kurgan, and then on the 14th, he was in the Zaritsa Gorge. Paulus was in a place called Golubinskaya, which is on the Don, and in fact, not even on the Don, but a tributary of the Don. So it's very peaceful. It's about 95 miles west of the battlefield. And when we went there with Anatoly Maresko, who refused to get out of the coach, as if the mere thought of Paulus being there was just too much for him. He just sat in the coach smoking cigarettes. But we went to the house, and the occupants had stashed quite a lot of Paulus's things. It was very entertaining. So I was able to kind of wave Paulus's plate around, dinner plate and everything else. But what a contrast. So you have this on the Soviet side, this extraordinary proximity to battle. On the other, in the tranquility of Golubinskaya, Paulus was kind of planning away and thinking, well, I have to hold my flanks. So these were flanks on the Don River. I don't think in September there was very much threat to them, but he wanted to wait till 2 Romanian armies moved up, and they did at the end of September. But when I asked Maresko, I said, what was the Soviet command at Stalingrad really frightened of in the early phase of the battle? And he said, well, we obviously knew that Paulus was a chief of staff, and we expected him to be replaced. And what we were really frightened of was that Rommel would come in, because he was an instinctive fighter and he would have just gone for the jugular. But that didn't happen. I mean, it's very easy to be wise with hindsight, but Paulus had an opportunity to surround the remains of the 62nd Army before they even got back to Stalingrad. That was on the 8th of January. He was overly cautious there. And I think if he had committed at least 1 extra division, I wouldn't be giving this talk. Well, but I guess I'm grateful to him, because I do like giving this talk, these kind of talks. But he should have gone for the jugular. And the one reason he should have gone for the jugular is the morale of the defenders was so low. So we have a situation then when 2 divisions are being sent in to Stalingrad, and their key objective is going to be Hill 102. That's why Churkov put his first command post there, because he realized that that would be exactly where the Germans would head for. And the 2 divisions that were earmarked were top elite professional divisions. Morale was very high. There are so many, the kind of topos really. One of them, whenever I used to read about Stalingrad, all the Germans coming into the city on the 14th of September were drunk. And that's just the most crazy suggestion ever, although some veterans buy into that. I mean, these are this is an elite army. It's never been tarnished by defeat. It was not involved in the battle for Moscow. It took Paris. It took Belgrade. It's won a whole series of victories in Ukraine. They've been given the order to take Stalingrad. They need to take it by a coup de main. They have to move very fast. No one's going to be getting pissed. But it's a myth to create this idea of, the Germans think it's already in the bag, but they're going to get this big shock. So I think we need to chuck that out the window. What was terrifying about the Germans in September and October was the coordination between infantry, artillery, tanks, and airstrikes. So the Sixth Army had exceptionally good radio intercept group. If you called in a targeted airstrike, it arrived very, very fast. Artillery strikes were very effective. And of course, you had very good tank backup. And as far as the Russians were concerned, the radios would break down. If you ordered an artillery strike, it normally wouldn't happen. The aircraft would go to the wrong place, so on and so forth. So it's the well-honed integration of this fighting force in terms of tech, in terms of morale, that makes them so terrifying. And what actually happens is that on the late morning of the 14th of September, when the Germans break into the city, they focus their air attack on the Kurgan. And it's a very inviting target. And then bring in artillery and then mortar strikes as they're getting close. And what actually happened, which was then suppressed, was that part of the army mutinied. In fact, the whole army was on the verge of mutiny, and we can see that in NKVD reports. But the Germans were using psychological tactics. They obviously had seen where the 112th and 33rd Division, these were shattered divisions that had been mauled at the Don, retreating piecemeal into Stalingrad, thoroughly pissed off. A veteran of the 112th Division who I went to Stalingrad with, he said we were on the effing Mamayev Kurgan for 6 days. No food got to us. He was an artilleryman, no shells. The defenses of the city were appalling. A bunch of kids could have knocked them over. We felt absolutely neglected. It was very hot then. We were constantly thirsty. Morale was appalling. And then when Chirkov arrived on the Mamayev Kurgan, the comment was one of Fortov's mates went up to the bunker that Chirkov was using in HQ and said, yeah, our new general has arrived. Chirkov was the third. Lopatin had just been probably executed for disobeying the not a step back order 227. But Chirkov had been injured in a car accident and had a walking stick. And he said, yeah, our new general has just arrived. I saw him pacing around the bunker on the Kurgan, waving the stick. So this is what's going to happen to us next. They're going to drive us into battle against the Germans like a load of pack animals. So morale is not high. And, in time, Chirkov would have a big effect on his army, but that was certainly not the case at the beginning. So shortly before 1 o'clock in the afternoon, when the Junkers were deliberately dive bombing and, terrifying the occupants of these trenches, another veteran, Surin Mitsayan of the 33rd Division, said one guy just got up and walked, and everyone started doing it. They just walked off the hill. So by the time the German infantry got there just after 1 o'clock, they had the whole thing. So the entire 62nd Army is on the verge of mutiny, and the troops on the Kurgan had enough. They felt abandoned. One of them said to me, by this stage, we were actually believing the Germans' race propaganda, that we were lousy soldiers and even inferior human beings. They were so dejected and demoralized. So the Kurgan was lost, and the effect was seen straight away, because precision artillery strikes were now being called in all over the city. And it looked as if Stalingrad was going to fall. The Germans got the central ferry crossing under machine gun fire. And so if we shift our attention briefly from the poor Mamayev Kurgan, which is now in German hands, to the HQ in Zaritsa Gorge. So in terms of psychology and height, and the same is true at Kalach, if you're looking at the Don steppe, the encirclement battles on the Don, that you have the high ground to the west of the river. So the same is true at Stalingrad. So if you're approaching as a Soviet soldier Stalingrad from, say, the secret railway, so-called secret railway from Saratov to Leninsk, and then you're traveling by lorry towards the far bank of the Volga, it's completely flat. But the Germans, before they launched their attack on the 14th, had possession of all the high ground above the entire length of Stalingrad. And an aspect of that, and in the summer these were dry, were a series of gullies and gorges, which were ideal to infiltrate. So you could just get machine gunners down them. And the Zaritsa Gorge, in that sense, was very vulnerable. And Chirkov ordered, so the 13th Guards had arrived, and not all of them, the first regiment of the 13th Guards had arrived on the far bank, and the Germans had complete control of the air. So the plan was to get them over at twilight, at dusk. But after the Kurgan was lost, Chirkov basically felt, quite rightly, I think, that they couldn't hold out unless those troops were ordered to cross in broad daylight. And so Radimtsev actually made 3 journeys across the Volga on the afternoon of the 14th of September. I mean, how he survived, I don't know. The first time, so he was ordered to come across, and his boat was hit, and he was covered in oil, and he had 6 people with him. He lost 4 of them, and he eventually arrived at Chirkov's HQ covered in oil. and there was this moment of dark humor when Chirkov said, Comrade General, do you normally present yourself for duty like this? To which Radimtsev said, go F your mother, Comrade Commander. And for the first time that day, everyone laughed. But at the end, when Chirkov illustrated that they are hanging on by their fingernails, he just embraced Radimtsev and said, if we don't make it today, let's die as proper soldiers. I mean, it was that desperate after the Kurgan fell. But they did get a detachment of the 13th Guards across, and they were able to hold on. And the most remarkable thing, because we have this idea of Stalingrad as a defensive battle, is that Chirkov took an extraordinary risk. Basically, the subtext of the memoirs, which were all very heavily edited in the Soviet period, was that Chirkov was afraid to leave the city even for a day or night, because the entire army would mutiny. And he instinctively felt that they needed to do something to raise the morale of the army. And I think he was quite right, but it was an incredibly risky decision to take. So he decided on the morning of the 16th of September to attempt to regain the Mamayev Kurgan using the last regiment of the 13th Guards that had crossed on the 15th of September, the 39th Regiment, and Ivan Schleff, who was coordinating that attack, took me through the horrific preparations where everything kept going wrong. And of course, when the Germans spotted them, because there was, as I said, there was no air support, no tank support, artillery support was laughable, all hell was going to break loose. And something very interesting, so in my book, I have a photo of Churkov and Rudimtsev that was taken, I got it from Rudimtsev's daughter, Natalia, that was taken on that morning as Churkov was telling these soldiers, I mean, this was a death mission, sell your lives dearly for the motherland. And it's an amazing photo. But it was going to, if they succeeded, the losses were going to be catastrophic. And but at the same time, amidst all this panoply of disasters and mess, veterans said to me that, and ironically, sometimes our strengths are our weaknesses. They said, however impressive the Germans were, and they were very impressive, don't believe our own propaganda, and we felt the Sixth Army was the best army in the world, and then said very pointedly to us, and we would have been interested to see how you'd have got on against them. So, okay. But one thing they noticed, and this was really not because of any cowardice, but because the technical side of operations and the German Sixth Army was so good, there was a kind of aversion to hand-to-hand fighting, because it was so easy to call in airstrikes, artillery strikes, to kill, to win from a distance, that you started to get used to it. And that was something they noticed. And that in the end worked on the 16th of September. But Rudimtsev was in charge, and Churkov was watching with his binoculars. And with veterans, you know, I mean, if you travel with them, travel around, particularly if you go to Stalingrad and get to know them a bit, you're more likely to get, because they suddenly remember things, you know, when they're at a place where they fought, or, but rather than just interviewing them in a cold interview, as it were, in Moscow or somewhere. But I did meet two veterans, Maria and Alexander, in Moscow, and Alexander was in the 13th Guards, and like many veterans, he was totally shot, you know, alcohol, PTSD, and I couldn't make any sense of him at all. But always treat veterans with respect. And then Alexander and Churkov were quite famous. Maria were quite famous because they'd fallen in love during the Battle of Stalingrad, which is quite a romantic, not setting. But Maria was the secretary for the 8th Guards veterans, that the 62nd Army became the 8th Guards, and I liked her. And Alexander said, we'd come over on Sunday because our kids are coming and our grandchildren, and from a practical point of view, this was a total waste of time, but I thought, what the hell, let's just go. So me and my translator, interpreter, Elena Yakovleva, went over, and so it was really nice, you know, these children and grandchildren that have survived, because, you know, with a life expectancy of hours, these veterans managed to get through Stalingrad and the war. And then suddenly it's what I call sometimes a veteran gets a clear. They move from not being able to remember everything to suddenly being totally focused. Alexander said, well, most well, Westerners show no interest in us as people. He said, they just come, get their testimony and piss off. And it's really nice that you're just spending time with us. So I said, it's a pleasure. Then a bit later, he said, so you're interested in Redemtsev? Well, you're actually sitting on his sofa. I said, what do you mean? Well, he said, well, he'd come round to see us and get quite pissed. So that's where he'd sleep. And I said, oh, okay. And you're drinking from his glass. And I said, oh, because he would get very emotional about the Battle of Stalingrad, and then there'd be toasts and all the glasses would be thrown in the fireplace. So we told him, if you're going to keep doing this, bring your own. So I was actually drinking from his glass and sitting on his sofa. So I said, okay. And then suddenly he became very, very clear. And it was also a big risk because our veterans are very aware of the most popular account of Stalingrad and how it, so basically indicates that the defenders of Stalingrad were brutalized by their commanders and by the regime. So it was quite a risk, but basically Alexander said on the morning of the 16th, so that if you can imagine this regiment assembling at the bottom of the Mamayev Kurgan with the Germans holding all the aces. They have machine gunners, they're holding the water towers, it's very well defended, and they have to get in broad daylight, very, very clear visibility right up the slope, and everything's going to be thrown at them. And Redemtsev sort of showed up, and the lieutenant who, with his group of men, had to lead the way, just froze. They'd been spotted by German spotter planes, so a bombardment was starting, and he had just started shaking, and he dropped his flask, and you could just feel the whole mood. And Alexander said, Redemtsev hit him in the face, slapped him. And afterwards, because they talked about it, Redemtsev said, I've never hit someone before, and never again. But in most situations, that would lose you, the troops. But actually, it was like it jolted them out, because Redemtsev said, for F's sake, get going. And suddenly it was like they just went, and they charged up that hill, taking huge losses. And when they got to the summit, so I heard this from Sasha Churkov, he said, God, when my father and the veterans met up, it was like I was hearing a totally different account of the battle. Churkov says something very interesting. So the small, very determined group was going straight into the trench where the machine gunners were diving in. That's where Kiselyov and his men were going, and it was going to be hand-to-hand fighting, very much like World War I, really. And Churkov said that for a moment, looking through the binoculars, I thought I was seeing an apparition. That there were soldiers that turned into a bogatyr, a mythical fighters of kind of supernatural stories. And I'm going to come back to that. So sustaining heavy casualties, they regained the Kurgan, and the red flag went up on the summit. And I mean, you have to be very careful with veteran testimony, and particularly with these iconic moments, but it seemed to me on balance that this was the first major moment when, if you like, the 62nd Army regained its soul by doing something that's not really in our image of Stalingrad, but just going for the Germans, regardless of the losses, were going to be huge. So an extraordinary moment that I think did galvanize the 62nd Army. And then the Germans obviously regrouped and counterattacked, and Redemtsev's forces had to go back closer to the Volga. So the next division that came in, Gorishna's 95th, was ordered to hold the Kurgan. And I first saw this chap on TV for the 40th anniversary on Russian TV, Nikolai Maznitsa. So he was a company commander in Gorishna's 95th. And so I recognized where exactly he was on the Kurgan. So if you ignore the wonderful Motherland Corps statue, but go left, so you don't climb up to the pseudo summit, because they elevated it so that she would be higher than the Statue of Liberty. I mean, it's the Cold War, you know, this was finished in 1967, so they're trying to make a point. But if you head off to the west, where the car park is, you find the summit where you can still see the water towers. No marking, no commemoration. The most important topographical feature just totally ignored, which is very typical, with this huge, you know, mother victory figure dominating proceedings. But Maznitsa was up in a foxhole very close to there. So Gorishna's men were trying to hold on to the summit. The Germans would take it, they'd take it back. And I don't mean this facetiously, but Maznitsa's party piece would be, he'd point to this place, which I was able to locate and then tell people about. And he'd say, on the 23rd of September, 1942, this is where I died. I guess that would get your attention, wouldn't it? If you'd come to Stalingrad and your veteran was saying that. So he said, yes, I was in a foxhole just here, and direct hit, and that's where I died. So what did that mean? Well, all the other people in the foxhole were dead. Maznitsa's heart has stopped. He seemed completely dead as well. So they took his identification papers, and indeed his family were told he died on that day. But 30 seconds later, another shell landed in that crater and blew Maznitsa right up in the air. And when he landed, his heart had started again. So he briefly died, and then sort of came back to life. And he said, by the end of that day, I was back commanding a company. And testimonies like this are extraordinary. And in a way, they're a kind of metaphor for the 62nd Army that was really dead and buried, and somehow miraculously came back to life in the hell that was Stalingrad. So Gorishna's troops are fighting, but then get pushed back, and then the Germans hold the summit, they fortify it, and the last division to hold the northeastern part of the Mamayev Kurgan after Gorishny is Batyuk's 284th. And this is important because of two reasons. Firstly, if you want to read a novel about Stalingrad, there are three that the veterans would recommend. So there are three. Two are written by war correspondents. One, the most famous, and it's an extraordinary work.
Boston. Yeah. I don't know what's happening.
Talk about that in gross. Good French. It'll be the French.
Let me see.
Have you considered your license limit?
I hope not. Oh no. Let me see if I can come back in and back in again then.
Is your Wi-Fi connected?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. I don't know what happened there.
Does it go on an hour time?
No, we're on we're okay. I might have to stop and then restart. Hold on. Okay, let me come out again and then I'll come back.
And by the time the project for the memorial had been created in 1958 when they all got together. It was codenamed. It was called the Mamayev Kurgan project. So the Mamayev Kurgan as epithet is created during the battle stress of Stalingrad. And it's a reminder that even pragmatic communist atheist soldiers and officers in that kind of cauldron of emotion can connect with some kind of spiritual or superstitious way of seeing the world. So that's me on the Kurgan, and I'd be very happy to take questions. Sorry for the break.
Not at all, Michael. Thank you so much. It's been a fantastic talk.
Thank you, everyone. It's very nice to be back. So please go ahead.
Could I ask the names of the books that you were recommending when you sadly disagreed? You mentioned, I think it was Frontline Stalingrad was one.
Yeah.
What were the others called?
Yeah, so there is Life and Fate. That's a very famous one. So that's Grossman's Life and Fate. Simonov, Days and Nights. And then Nekrasov is Frontline Stalingrad. So Grossman's got Grossman, and Simonov is spelled Simonov, and Nekrasov is spelled Nekrasov, Victor Nekrasov.
Got that, thank you.
And I mean, from a literary point of view, Grossman's Life and Fate, which had a huge influence on Anthony Beevor. I mean, he was an amazingly brave journalist and writes incredibly well. But it's not the book the veterans like the most.
Any other questions? I've got one. Yeah.
Yeah.
You speak quite a lot about the spirituality of it. What the feeling that I've got away with there is very much about the spiritual side of the engagement.
Yes.
Is that something you associate particularly with the Stalingrad era, or would you say that's the Russian experience throughout the war?
No, thank you. That's a very good question. I think to some extent it's very closely connected with Stalingrad, because when the Germans broke through to Ranok on the 23rd of August, so they broke through to the Volga there, and then on the 8th of September, Hoth's Panzer Army breaks through in the south. The 62nd Army is cut off, and the expectation was that it needed to be reinforced or helped within days, but effectively the 62nd Army is on its own. And then what has to happen is that divisions are fed into Stalingrad on both sides, the German and the Russian. So the view is, first of all, as long as they hold out, whatever they think or get up to, we're not too bothered. And of course, the NKVD have been incorporated into the regular army. So, if you spoke to a veteran and said, well, what about the blocking detachments? They'd say, well, there was one old sergeant who was quite lame with a pipe. That was all. So if we'd decided to make a rush for the Volga, we weren't going to be stopped. But going back to your question, in the summer of 1942, the orders, the chivalrous orders of Russian heroes like Kutuzov and Alexander Nevsky were reinstated, and there was actually an order of Alexander Nevsky, so you could be presented with this order for courage. And one year I was on the parade, 9th of May parade in Moscow, And of course, during the parade, it's very serious, but afterwards you get to chat to a lot of very interesting veterans. And one veteran, he was a mine of information. And when I spoke to him about the Order of Alexander Nevsky, he said, yeah, you know, Churkov gave out the first of those. So this embracing of heroes is very interesting because, of course, the film Alexander Nevsky came out in 1938 and then was banned because of the Nazi-Soviet pact. But in 1941, it got mass release. So, you know, famously, the medal that was given was based on the actor who played Alexander Nevsky, who says, he who comes to us with the sword will die by the sword. And that's the influence for the motherland statue with the sword is that, because during the Battle of Stalingrad, every Soviet soldier would have a postcard with Alexander Nevsky on it, the director of the tractor factory. You know, his cigarette holder had Alexander Nevsky, you know, that shield. It was everywhere, which is very ironic because when the Bolsheviks took Tsaritsyn, but this is Stalingrad before it became Stalingrad, the first thing they did in the Civil War was to blow up the cathedral of Alexander Nevsky, just because, of course, they hated him. You know, he was a saint. Catherine II had made a kind of chivalrous order, so he was targeted. In 1942, he was lovingly embraced, and that really is the sign that there was a very unique spirit. And by 1944, when it was clear the war was won, that was all pushed aside, and you know, the communists were tightening up everything again. So I think it was very particular to the middle part of the war, that spirit, because basically at that crisis point, Stalin realized that communism, belief in communism, was not going to be enough. So he broadened it out into a kind of fighting for our motherland, rather than just fighting for the communist ideology. And a smart move it was. So thank you. Very good question. And I think it's absolutely on point for Stalingrad.
Can I ask, one of the images that we're often presented with is that the Soviets feeding just enough troops to perpetuate, but becomes highly attritional, and that is seen as a definite plan, something that they decided that they were going to do. So rather like Verdun in the First World War being the sort of graveyard of the French army, they were effectively trying to recreate that. Is that apocryphal? Is that something that's been created post the events, or do you think that the Soviets actually had a plan and generally stuck to it to achieve that, a battle of attrition?
Yeah, a very good question. And that's certainly been suggested by quite a few people. So how that would work would be that if you go back to the Don River and the Germans are launching their attack from the Don Bend, as crude Russian cartoons would show from December, if you don't finish off the battle quickly, you're putting your head in a noose. And if you can then hold the Germans, bog them down, you can build up your strengths on the flanks. And so absolutely right. But when Zhukov and Vasilevsky were discussing this, Stalin said to them, we need to hold the city first. And the thing is that we have the advantage and disadvantage of hindsight, and that you couldn't put too many troops in Stalingrad because the thing was, if we looked at it from the German point of view, that so by October, when the Red Army is fighting much better, they have spotters. So every factory chimney there is an artillery spotter, and as soon as a new German division arrives and they use an assembly area, that will be targeted. Well, equally, that if you brought over a substantial amount of soldiers and ammunition. I mean, the narrow frontage that they were holding, there was just not enough space, and they would be blown to smithereens. So it was they were feeding in enough, but at crisis points of the battle, they got it wrong. And I would argue that on the 14th of October, I also believe the 14th of September, but on the 14th of October, the Germans could have won because by mustering all their strength, they blocked any crossing of the Volga day and night. I mean, this is recorded in the War Diary of the 62nd Army for 2.5 days. And there was an opportunity to win when they broke through the tractor factory to the Volga. And when I worked with Alexander Rakitsky, who was the most difficult of all the veterans. I mean, but at the end, he gave up and cooperated. He was head of operations of Zolodev's division holding the tractor factory, and he went with Zolodev to the emergency Army Command meeting at the end of the 14th of October, and he said that basically that they knew that Paulus had one fresh division, and they were expecting him to push it into the gap, and there was nothing to stop that division simply rolling right along the Volga and winning, and they were expecting to die. But Paulus, again being Paulus, held back. So this is an example of the tightrope you're walking if you don't get that very difficult balance right. But in general, I think there's truth in what has been said and what you're saying. But it's also about, I think, combining that broader strategic principle with the morale and motivation to keep holding the line with what you've got. So it's a balance of the two, really.
Thank you.
Well, Michael, thank you so much. It's been a fantastic talk, and thank you very much for joining us. And sorry about the slight break in the course of it, but I think everything's worked out well in the end. Thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure. And are you going to be reconstructing the fighting on the Mamayev Kurgan? Are you doing that?
We are indeed, and it's difficult to reconstruct completely accurately, actually, with everything we've got, but we've done our best, and we've done a little bit of reconstruction of the initial stages from towards the foothills, if you like, of the hill, and things are moving up in the next stage towards where the water tanks, the water tank area is located. So yeah, good, interesting afternoon ahead of us.
Well, good for you, because that bit of the battle is often neglected. One reason is that it was sort of fudged in a lot of the memoirs because they didn't want to own up to the fact that the army had mutinied. But once you fudge that, I think the storming of the Kurgan on the 16th was epic, and I'm very glad you're doing it.
Absolutely. Thank you once again.
Big pleasure. Thank you, and have a great time with your reconstruction.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'll be back in touch again soon. Take care.
Yeah, take care.
Bye-bye now.
Yeah. Right.